got a pretty, we're getting that going. Recording has begun. Again, Carl Eppich with Southern New Hampshire Planning. And we've got a pretty good agenda here, so I'm going to get right to it. Calling to order, roll call. I can see who's here, with the exception of let's see. Cole just said he's here. Cole's with
Manchester.
Yeah.
Chamber.
Yep, got it. Chamber. Good. Let's go down. Tim. Matt Barone.
Good morning.
Good morning. Matt, who are you with again?
I'm with Central.
Great. Ricky, Kristen, Jillian.
Morning.
In the room. Let me just go around.
Nancy Michaels,
Mike-
Dairy Chamber,
Dairy
Dairy
Chamber.
London Dairy Chamber.
Nancy. Michaels. Fred, I know you're back there. Friends with Easter Seals. Sorry, who else is in the room? We got staff. We got Adam. Nancy. I got Nancy.
Yep.
Adam, Nate, and Zach. And then we also have got George, Derry, Tammy from SNHPC, Cam. Did I miss anyone? I don't think so. Okay. All right, thank you. We'll go into action on the minutes, although we don't have a quorum. We can't take action. So yeah, without a quorum in the room, everyone, we will not be taking action on the minutes. We'll just skip those. Yeah, no action, official action on anything else. We'll skip that. Make an attempt at it in September. And so we're right on to new business, and I'm going to go right to Nate. Nate's going to go over the FY 2025-2034 10-year plan project evaluations. He's got a brief PowerPoint presentation. All right. Good morning, everyone. As always, I have a PowerPoint presentation. How about yourself? Do you expect anything else from me? Can everybody see this on the screen? Is this working?
Yep. Yes.
You get one nod. Okay. All right. A nod. Okay. All right. I'm going to work under the assumption that everybody can see this on the screen, and I will dive in. So, some updates about the 10-year plan process that we have been embarking on. As a reminder, we work with our colleagues around the state at the other regional planning commissions, as well as New Hampshire DOT, to develop the 10-year plan on a biennial cycle. The current 10-year plan is officially now the fiscal year 23 to 32 10-year plan that was signed into law by Governor Sununu on July 22nd. So the next update of the plan, which is what we're going to be talking about today, the update that we're embarking on, will cover fiscal year 2025 to 2034. So generally speaking, the projects that we are adding in this cycle will be programmed in 2033 and 2034. It's hard to think that far ahead, but that is the time frame that we're looking at. And my slide does not want to advance. There we go. Okay. I'm not going to go through this. I show this slide in every 10-year plan presentation I do, just because we're always talking about these different plans and programs, and so we're kind of showing how things fit together here. We have our metropolitan transportation plan that looks on a long range basis out to 20+ years. That is one of the main pipelines for projects to go into the 10-year plan. The 10-year plan is a requirement that we do here in New Hampshire. It's a state construct. You won't see 10-year plans in many other states. We do that here in New Hampshire. And importantly, when something advances into the 10-year plan, that constitutes a formal funding commitment for that project. Lastly, of course, is our Transportation Improvement Program, or our TIP, which is a federal requirement. And here in New Hampshire, the TIP is generally comprised of the first 4 years of the 10-year plan. So we'll go into the updates here. In previous 10-year plan cycles, New Hampshire DOT has allocated a total of $50 million in the 10-year plan process for projects that come out of each regional planning commission as local and regional priorities. Of that $50 million statewide, our share here in the Southern New Hampshire Planning Commission region, based on population and federal aid eligible lane miles, has been $8.55 million. And for those of you who have been here for a few years, you remember that number as we constrain to $8.5 million in each 10-year plan cycle. However, some good news came, a good development came with the passing of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which I call here the IIJA. It also is now referred to as the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, or the bill, but they are the same thing. And as a result of the IIJA, or the bill, whatever your preference is, the formula funding that comes into New Hampshire for Title 23 highways and bridges, the core federal transportation funding that comes into New Hampshire, increased. It increased by a little over 20%. And we have been having conversations with New Hampshire DOT about that increase and how it should be reflected in a corresponding increase to the regional allocations in each region. And we have now received, at least verbally, confirmation that the statewide allocation for 10-year plan projects will be increasing from $50 to $60 million, in line with what that overall formula funding increase is statewide. And as a result, the SNHPC's increase, corresponding increase for this 10-year plan cycle, will be about $2 million. So we'll from $8.55 million to $10.56 million. So we do anticipate being able to program $10.56 million worth of projects. Of course, when we're that also, when we're talking about programming funding, we're talking about year of expenditure dollars for 2033 and 2034 in this case. And so inflation will consume a significant portion of that. But an increase is good, and we are thankful for it. So we will be constraining to a higher dollar figure in this 10-year plan update, which is great news for our region. Also, as a reminder, all 9 regional planning commissions use the same set of 15 criteria to evaluate projects for the 10-year plan. Those 15 criteria are weighted individually by each region to reflect the unique needs and priorities of the region. So, congestion factors are probably weighted more substantially in our region than they would be in the North Country Council region, because the needs of the North Country Council region are different, and the issues that they face are different. So back in June, Sylvia led a process with both the TAC and our MPO to arrive at updated criteria weightings regionally that will be used for this 10-year plan update. Here they are. I'm not going to walk through each of these because you spent an entire meeting kind of walking through the criteria weightings, and both at the TAC and the MPO level. Suffice it to say, we have the MPO has adopted its weightings for this cycle. They are here on this slide, and that's what we will use to evaluate and prioritize the projects for the 10-year plan. As with the previous now 3 cycles of 10-year plan updates, engineering review is required for all projects to be included in the 10-year plan. Essentially, engineering and scoping and cost estimating. And so accordingly, every 2 years, we release a request for qualifications for on-call engineering firms to help us with this. And we did that in a few months ago and have now, through that process, have selected VHB to serve as our on-call engineering firm for the next 2 years. We are, as we speak, even today, finalizing our contract with VHB for this work. And accordingly, VHB will be working on scoping and cost estimating for the projects that are proposed in our region for this 10-year plan update cycle. So we look forward to working with VHB again on that. A reminder about the regional kind of 10-year plan schedule and some of the benchmarks that we need to hit later on. We have already sent our solicitation correspondence to communities. We have already received project submissions back and have gone through the weighting process, as I just mentioned, at the TAC and MPO level for criteria. Today, we will seek volunteers for, and I'll talk about that in a few minutes, for a project evaluation subcommittee to work with our staff to dive into some of these projects in more detail. For the next couple of months, at least through October, that engineering review will take place with VHB, and we will work to evaluate those projects, ultimately to develop an initial short list of candidate projects that we will send to DOT. This is not our final set of priorities. It's an initial set of projects that we will be informing DOT are candidate projects for this 10-year plan cycle, kind of an initial short list. And then DOT will review on their end some of those candidate projects and advise us if they have any comments on those. And then ultimately, our true deadline here is March 31st of 2023. That's when our final set of regional priorities are due to New Hampshire DOT for the next 10-year plan. So I'm going to start and just highlight some of the projects that have been submitted through our regional solicitation process in this cycle. I'm not going to go into great detail here, just to give an initial overview about some of what we've received. And I'm going to go in alphabetical order by community. So we'll start with the town of Bedford. We received 2 project proposals from the town of Bedford. The first is for safety improvements on Route 101 from Wallace Road to the Bedford town line. This is Bedford's #1 priority for inclusion, new project to include in the 10-year plan. This is part of the continued implementation of the Route 101 corridor study that dated back to 2002. So there were 2 companion Route 101 corridor studies, one in Bedford and one that covered the towns, the neighboring communities of Amherst, Milford, and Wilton. And there have been now 2 implementation projects at New Hampshire DOT to implement aspects of that corridor study. One of them will take place, I believe, in the town of Amherst shortly, and the other one will take place in the town of Milford. And so the next segment in line is really this segment. It's initially, as we understand, the state's 3rd priority. The top 2 segment priorities have already been funded through those other projects, as we understand it. So this would be a natural continuation of the implementation of the 2002 corridor study, and would be the first implementation of that corridor study within our region. So looking here at Wallace Road to the Bedford town line, but with a specific priority on the section between Wallace Road and Elk Drive. Safety improvements could take many forms, including a continuous 2-way left turn lane, buffered median, or various intersection improvements, improved pedestrian crossings, lighting, and left turn safety improvements. Part of this will be what VHB helps us to scope. Through their knowledge and expertise of the corridor. And so we'll get a better handle on the ultimate scope through that process with VHB. So we will be assigning this project to VHB for scoping and cost estimating purposes. The second project that was submitted by the town of Bedford is the construction of a multi-use path adjacent to Route 101 from Wallace Road to the Bedford town line. This is the town's #2 priority for inclusion in the 10-year plan. The project would involve the construction of a 10-foot wide multi-use path. This is a map. I don't have a better graphic to show for this particular project than this map, but this is a map of the town of Bedford's bicycle pedestrian connectivity. It's a connectivity map of improvements in their bicycle and pedestrian plan. This purple segment shows a multi-use path on Route 101. And so this is, as I mentioned, the town's second priority for inclusion in the plan. And we will assign this to VHB as resources allow. So we want to ensure that the top priority project from each community gets the scoping and cost estimating attention. And then if we have the ability funding wise to engage VHB to do additional projects beyond what each community is identified as their top priority, then we will certainly do so. The town of Deerfield, this is a project that we considered in the last 10-year plan update cycle. It did not get funded in the last 10-year plan cycle, but the town of Deerfield would like to ensure that this remains under consideration and is reconsidered in this 10-year plan update. This would involve the conversion of the intersection of Route 107, Candia Road and Church Street in Deerfield to a roundabout. So we did have VHB scope this project and develop a cost estimate last time. We will assign, ask VHB as part of our task order with them to update that scope and cost information to current conditions. So we think that'll be a fairly straightforward process for them to do that, but we do want to make sure, given inflation and other factors, that we do have the most current and defensible cost estimate for the project that we can have. The town of Londonderry identified 4 different projects from our metropolitan transportation plan as priorities to advance into the 10-year plan. Those include capacity improvements on Route 28 from Sims and Vista Ridge Drive to the intersection of 128. Secondly, the construction of the final phase 7 of the Londonderry Rail Trail from Route 28 to the Derry Town line. Increasing capacity of Route 102 from exit 4 to Route 128, and the construction of 4,300 linear feet of sidewalk from Pillsbury along Pillsbury Road from Ash Street to Gilchrist Road. We obviously, due to resource constraints, we wouldn't be able to fund all 4 of those projects in this 10-year plan update. Nor would we be able to, given the resource constraints on our on-call engineering contract, be able to assign all 4 of those projects for engineering scoping. So we're going to focus on the top 2 priorities submitted by the town of Londonderry. We will, the top priority to increase capacity on Route 28 from Sims and Vista Ridge Drive to 128, we will assign that to VHB for scoping and cost estimating purposes. And just like Bedford, if resources allow, beyond the top priority project in the community, we will, if resources allow, assign VHB to do scoping and cost estimating for phase 7 of the Londonderry Rail Trail from Route 28 to the Derry Town line. For the city of Manchester, this is similar to Deerfield. This is a project for exit 8 interchange improvements in the Wellington Road area that we did, you may remember from 2 years ago. This remains the city's top priority for inclusion in the 10-year plan. So we are going to assign a VHB the task of updating the scoping memorandum and cost estimate for this project for adaptive signal control, intersection capacity improvements, and a bicycle lane. And then lastly, for new project proposals in this 10-year plan update cycle, the town of Windham has proposed improvements to their greenway. That's roughly shown on this map here. So this is the Meeting House Road area, and this would run east-west to the westerly right-of-way of I-93, and ultimately would connect through a state-owned trail to the Fremont branch of the Rockingham Rail Trail, which would provide connectivity to other communities. So this is the conversion of an abandoned railroad right-of-way about 2.27 miles into a paved multi-use path. As I mentioned, that connection to the Fremont branch of the Rockingham Rail Trail would provide connectivity to Derry, Hampstead, Sandown, and Fremont. So we will assign this project to VHB for scoping and cost estimating. I want to mention that we had a couple of communities submit projects, I shouldn't say submit projects, raise concerns, safety concerns about intersections, even though they did not submit these projects for 10-year plan consideration. So even though they weren't submitted for 10-year plan considerations, our staff, I've already talked with Carl about this, will pursue as part of the next road safety audit application cycle, work with these communities to see if these intersections would qualify for a road safety audit, and thereby a road safety audit being kind of the entree into the highway safety improvement program. So in Deerfield, that intersection would be an intersection of concern is Route 43 and 107. And then in the town of Derry, Route 28, Lawrence Road, and South Range Road. So our staff will do some homework with the communities on these intersections, look at crash history, and if the crash history qualifies, we will seek inclusion. We'll seek road safety audit and ultimately inclusion for improvement funding through the highway safety improvement program if these intersections qualify. So in summary, we are going to be assigning the following projects to VHB. Bedford Route 101 safety improvements, Deerfield roundabout conversion project, the Route 28 capacity expansion project in Londonderry, the Exit 8 Wellington Road improvement project in Manchester, and the Wyndham Greenway proposal in Windham. Those for sure will be assigned to VHB for scoping and cost estimating. Beyond that, if resources allow and if our engineering budget with VHB allows, we will, if we have those resources available, we will then ask VHB to look at the multi-use, to do scoping and cost estimating for the multi-use path in Bedford, as well as phase 7 of the Londonderry Rail Trail in Londonderry. So again, these 5 projects are definitely going to be scoped and cost estimated by VHB. These 2 projects will be scoped and cost estimated by VHB if we have the resources available to do that. Lastly, again, as we've done in previous cycles, staff does request that the TAC appoint a project evaluation subcommittee to help us evaluate these projects and develop that initial kind of prioritized shortlist that will go to New Hampshire DOT. Again, this is a subcommittee that would be providing a prioritization recommendation to the full TAC. The full TAC could then accept or reject that recommendation as they see fit, as we've done in previous cycles. The subcommittee should be comprised of what I would call disinterested TAC members, i.e. those representing those communities or agencies that did not submit project proposals. That helps to, it's kind of, the jury of your peers sort of concept here. And so prior to today's meeting, we've already received communications from both George Sioris of Derry and Linda Kuhnhart of Francistown, who are both willing to serve with us with staff on such a subcommittee. but we would certainly love to have another TAC member or two assist us with that if anybody is willing to do so. With that, I will stop here and answer any questions that anybody may have, and otherwise we would certainly, if anybody is willing to volunteer to serve on an evaluation subcommittee, we would be happy to take your volunteering. Any questions? Or did I cover it all? Maybe I covered it all, or maybe nobody could hear me. I don't know. It's fine. Well, assuming there are no questions, and if anybody wishes to volunteer, please contact us. Otherwise, we may be contacting you. Thank you. I will yield the floor back to you, Carl.
All right. Thank you, Nate. That's great.
And I'm going to sit for just one moment. Next item on the agenda here is Zach Swick from in our office. He's going to go over the New Hampshire 2020 and to 2050 population projections. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, who came in late?
Yeah, if you came in late. Kevin. Yeah, Kevin. Yeah. Who else? Oh, David Pierce. Okay, Zach.
Okay, can everyone see that slide that says New Hampshire County Municipal Population Projections?
Yes, we can.
Thank you, Tammy. Okay, so I'm going to give a overview of the county and municipal population projections. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Zach Swick. I'm a GIS analyst here at Southern New Hampshire Planning Commission. So some background. Since 1964, the New Hampshire Office of Planning and Development has provided population projections, obviously not under that name, under its many different resurrections and incarnations, but they've been doing this for a long time. And last time it was done in 2016. The consultant was RLS Demographics. They're the ones who did it for this time as well. And then they worked with a small working group that included myself and then representatives from Central and Stratford Regional Planning Commission, plus people from OPD. So, low clarification. What is a projection? You know, a projection is not a weather forecast. We're not saying that tomorrow it's going to be sunny and there's not a whole lot we can do about it. A projection is a prediction if. It's a prediction if certain, criteria that we that we put up stay true. If certain things we continue to do, we do as we do. That's what happens. It's more like, not to make it too grandiose, an old biblical prophet. It's not that tomorrow there's a 50% chance of the Assyrians coming. It's if you don't give up your wicked ways, if you continue down this path, God will send the Babylonians. This is the similar thing. It's not saying this will happen. Is today is like tomorrow. This is what we can expect to happen. So as background, here is the population and the population growth. So that's population on the left and population growth on the right for New Hampshire going from 1990 out to 2050. So anytime in this presentation when you see a dashed line, that's a prediction, that's a forecast. Anytime it's a solid line, that means it's a actual as it actually happened. And you can see that New Hampshire, up until about right after World War II, was fairly rural. It was a small state with a couple larger mill towns and some market towns, but it was pretty rural. And then with the suburbanization and the expansion of the interstate system after World War II, the population exploded and went from 400,000 to almost 1.4 million today. But you can also see that that rate of expansion was really big. It peaked around 1970, 1980. When my parents moved to the region, like a lot of people. Yeah, so Adam's parents too, moved to the area in 1989, and part of that peak. And since then, it's been falling off. And you can see that projected actually, the population growth in the state will go negative by 2050. So what are the inputs and the outputs for this model? The state, so there are two components. One is the county and the other is the municipal. For the county level, we look at population by age and sex, age-specific birth rates, age-specific death rates, age-specific net migration rates, special populations like colleges, prisons, nursing homes, because if you're in a prison, you're probably not going to be having kids. There's stuff like that. If you're in college, you're not going to be settling there long-term, hypothetically. So we have those county numbers, and those county numbers are then all combined for the state numbers. For the municipal numbers, we take the current population, look at the net population growth over the previous decade as a percentage of the net growth for the whole county, look at known imminent large housing developments, but the majority of it is driven by the county because we don't have good demographic age and sex and birth and death rates for individual towns. They're just too small. One, we don't have them, and if we did, we couldn't model them anyway because the populations are too small. So the municipal projections are largely dependent on the counties. So if you have instances like Hooksett is in Merrimack County, it's our only town that's in Merrimack County. Its population projections are going to look different than a county just next door because of that factor. And there's not a whole lot we can do about it. We just have to keep that in mind going forward. So what are the outputs? So for the outputs for the state and county level, we have population estimates by age, sex, and race for every 5 years from 2020 to 2050. I'll only be really talking about age because sex and race, sex is going to look primarily like it does today. There's not much change. And the race, by the way it was done, the way we had to do it in this particular projections, it's not very useful. And so I'm just going to ignore it because it doesn't really tell us anything. And so for the municipal model outputs, we have population estimates every 5 years from 2020 to 2050. We'll also have an Excel tool ultimately where we can go and say, okay, hypothetically, if we had a migration rate of X instead of Y, what would the population look like then? You can hit a calculate button and it'll do a little calculation. That'll be accessible to at least the regional planning commissions. I don't know if that's going to be publicly accessible. That's I should know more after we have we're going to have a training session in the next few months. Also, something about these numbers. This is a sneak peek for you all. These numbers have not been officially released yet by OPD. They will release it sometime this month, but the report itself is not out yet. So there might be a small change here or there, but there's not going to be large changes. It's going to be very small changes, if any. So here are the population projections for the counties from 2020 out to 2050. And a red color here means that for that county, that's the high year. That's the year when that's the highest. And so you can see for most of them, the high years are out towards 2040, 2050. The exceptions for those being some of the southern and more northern counties like Cheshire, which is County Keene, has it population peaking around 2030. For Sullivan County, it's about 2030, 2035. And Coas, peaked according to this, is currently peaking now, and will continue to decline from that. And just for reference, we're going to be primarily looking at Hillsborough, Merrimack, and Rockingham counties because those are the three counties that SNHPC towns exist in. And about 60% of them are in Hillsborough, 35% are in Rockingham, and then about 5% are in Merrimack County. So these are the counties' growth rate over time on the left. That you can see that it goes from 1970 to 2050, and on the right is 2020 to 2050. The difference here is the number, whatever the population is indexed at that particular year. So in 1970 on the left, 100, whatever the population was, it's indexed as 100. So it's growing proportional to the 1970 population. On the 20 on the right side, it's based on the 2020 population. So in 1970, you see that everybody's basically growing except over there, and that's Coos County, which is peaks in 1980 and kind of begins to recede, and everybody else is kind of growing. On the right, it's important to note though, again, we have some counties that are falling off rather quickly, like Coos, and I believe that's probably Sullivan, right above that. But the ones, everybody up above, everybody's growing, except when you get out to 2040. Between 2040 and 2050, all the counties are projected to decline in population, with the exception of Stratford County. And that would they're probably going to be in 2050, 2055 sort of area. So these are the population pyramids for both New Hampshire and then Hillsborough on the top, and then Hillsborough, Merrimack, and Rockingham counties on the bottom. 2020 is on the left, so that's basically present day. 2050 is on the right. Now you can say, if you haven't seen these before, you might say, why are these called population pyramids? It doesn't look like a pyramid to me. Because traditionally, population distributions look like this. Up until basically the present day, the younger population accounted for the vast majority of the overall population. And what happened was child death rates were just so high, we really have no appreciation for today. And so you would have this kind of, pyramid where you would have, you would have almost all the population down in the beginning years, and then the majority of that population would die and then move up through the population pyramid. You can see instead here, what we have is kind of an inverted population pyramid, where we have, I don't know if people online can see, but around 19 and on the 2020 side, you can see about between 74 and 50, there's a bump there, and that's the baby boomers. And that's literally, as we look on the right, the population moving through in a different way. So we have the baby boomers here, followed by the millennials. Here are the millennials, and here are the baby boomers. So that's the population moving through the general, moving through our lifetimes. So here's what's going to happen. So in 2020, on the left, we have 2020 to 2025. We have births, deaths, net migration, and population change. If you want to calculate population change, those are the three things you need to know, and those are the only three things you need to know, because people die, people are born, and people move. And if you can account for those, you can account for what the overall change is going to be. And so on the left, we can see that, for the next 5 years, it's projected that we're going to have some births, we're going to have some deaths, we're going to have some migration, and overall, we're going to have a net population gain of about 50 to 60,000. You look on the right, that's 2045 to 2050. You can see there that deaths are now about twice what they are today. And so that's what happens is, not to make too light of this, is that the baby boomer generation is going to age and at some point pass away. And that is that what we have now is, even though we have relatively the same number of births, the same number of migration, that population change is actually now negative. And it's a little less, so this is Hillsborough, Merrimack, Rockingham counties. It's a little less, it's a little less drastic, but we still see, even by 2045, 2050, we are seeing a negative population change. And that's again driven by these increase in deaths. So this is the projected natural population increase. This is just births minus deaths. And we can see that today, both for the state and our counties, we're positive. We have, over the next 5 years, we're projected to have more births than deaths. Starting 2025 to 2030, that is no longer projected to be the case. We are going to naturally have fewer births than we are deaths. And that's, and we can see that again. You're still looking at population index at 2020 at 100. And what it's all I'm trying to show you here is that as the population bands move through time and as populations grow and shrink, you can see on the left, as the 65 to 74, it starts to grow over the next 30 years, and while 55 to 64 decreases over the next 60 years. In the middle, again, 75 to 84, that's blue, increases and then decreases over the next 30 years, while 85 plus continues to grow the entire time up until that point, in which case, at some point, people move on. Or not, or they hang around. So what happens here is we have, we've talked various times talked about the silver tsunami, and somebody did a report back in the days of New Hampshire that came up with that term. It wasn't me, but we can literally see it here, where you have 2020 on the bottom and 2050. I'm sorry, 2020 on the top and 2050 on the bottom. Whereas you have the wave of baby boomers that are now, getting into, approaching their 80s or in their late 50s. I guess that's a little. They're more in their 60s, and then we have the millennials that are now in their 30s. And so, people, I'm there. I'm there in the millennials there in the top one. By the time we get to the bottom, I've now moved into the retirement age, part of the crest of the wave. And the baby boomers are, you can see at that point, are all in their 80s or no longer with us. And Generation Alpha, which would be the generation that my children's generation, or my nieces and nephews, their generation will be coming into the next largest population band. But even then, they're smaller than the millennials. And that's largely driven by total fertility rates. The total fertility rate is just it's an abstraction. We say if a typical woman was to have however many kids during her lifetime, what would that be? And you can say then, okay, based on the death rate, what would the replacement rate be? And for a developed country like the US, the replacement rate is about 2.1. Well, we haven't, if you look at the top right here, you can see that, we were about 3.6 in 1960. And then we were about roughly 2.1 in 1990, 2.1 here in 2007. And now we're about 1.6. And that's pretty typical, and it varies a lot by county. So Rockingham County replacement rate is actually 1.3. And we're not outliers here. The United States is about 1.6. That's the same, basically the same as the UK, Canada, a little bit higher than Germany, and then we're way below countries like the DRC is over 6, and South Korea is less than 1. And so it can vary a lot based on the country. But this drives a lot of what we can see with our demographics. And it's very easy to measure fertility rates and natural increase, because we can model basically how many people we're going to have, or how many children women are going to have, and how often people are going to die. And to turn that around, it's changing direction on a freight ship. You can't do it easily. It takes a long time. Migration in general is much harder to predict, because who knows what the future is going to be like, where people are going to move, that sort of thing. Here, I don't want to spend too much time on this, but you can just look at the different ages here for Hillsborough, Rockingham, and Merrimack counties. The orange there is the less than 20 years old. Red is 65 years or older, and blue is 85 years or older. And we can just see, if we look on the left, going from 1950 through about 2000, the under 20 population grows and grows and gets to about 230,000 or whatever, and then begins to fall and level off into the future. While the 75-year-old population in about 2030 will surpass the less than 20-year-old population, which means we're going to have more seniors than we are minors, essentially. And even below that, you can see that 85 years and older is going to go from basically nothing in 1950 to almost 60,000 in 2050. And if we look on the right here, this is as a percentage of the total population. 20-year-olds and less kind of level out here at about 20%. 65-year-olds get up to be about 25%, and 85-year-olds get out to be about 7% or so. So we're going to have a much older population in the future. I'll just look at our region real quick here. So on the right, we have from 1900 I'm sorry, what we have from 1900 to 2050. On the left is SNHPC population. In the middle is Manchester's population. And for those who are in the room and can't see, on the right is the SNHPC population with everybody except Manchester. And you can see that through about 1950, our region was basically Manchester plus, a couple little farm towns. We had Derry, which would have been a market town, where you could come and bring your grain to the train station or whatever. But in general, the population was about 3/4 in Manchester. And again, when the Everett Turnpike 93, developed, and then northern Massachusetts becomes a big business hub, big commercial hub, and you can now commute from your home in Derry to your job around 128. Our population it just explodes, and that's almost entirely carried by the areas outside of Manchester. Here's a population growth rate over time. You can see that the region kind of grows and falls, and then there's a big bump around peaking in the 2000s. Manchester is in the middle, actually drops. In the middle in 1920, I can't remember exactly. The mill closes. Summer mills start open, but that's when the city starts to fall on harder times. And since then, the city's kind of bounced back and forth in terms of population growth. Whereas, if we look at just the areas that are not Manchester, you can see that they, initially decrease in the early 20th century and then explode, peaking in 1980s and 1990s, and then again falling down, and are projected to, get down to about 0 in 2050. These are just a list for your information, the populations for different years. It's not all the years, obviously, from 1920 or from 1900 to 2050. You can't fit them on the screen, but just you go from Londonderry in 1910 was about 1,500 people. By 1960, it was 2,500 people. By 1980, it was 13,500. By 2000, it was 23,000. Some of these communities just grew by hundreds of percent every decade or a couple of times. In part, that's due to the fact that they were just relatively small to begin with. They were small farming towns, but in general, they just really grew. You can see that here are the fastest growing decades in the 20th century for all our towns, and almost all of them are in the 1960s. Some of them are Bedford's in the 50s, a lot are in the 70s and the 80s, depending on a little bit how far they were away from the highway. You can see Ware was a little bit later, since it's a little bit farther away from some of these other. It's a little more rural than it is in some of our areas. When they're growing by, in case Wyndham in the 1960s grew by 128%. So what's that look like for the future? Well, these are obviously the population on 2000, 2010, 2020. Those are obviously real numbers, and then we have projections going out to 2050. And I'll use Auburn for example because it's on top. Auburn in 2020 was about just under 6,000 people, and by 2050 it'll be about 6,500, and it's actually beginning to decrease there in terms of population. You can see that it starts to get decreasing by a -1%. That again is driven largely by the county, and since Auburn is in Rockingham, it's driven by the Rockingham demographics. I would probably expect that Auburn would not decrease by then, just based on the fact that Auburn has built a lot of single-family homes in the last 20 years, and therefore has a younger population than Rockingham County in general. But if it's not happening this decade, it happens the next decade. These aren't, pushing things off for very long. And just giving you an example of how we compared, these projections compared to what the previous ones. So on the left are what was predicted in the 2016 population, and this is what's actually occurred in the 2020 on the right. And you can see that they range from about 0 to 7%, being off. And so, and I would, for all of these, like all predictions, the closer the year is out, so I'm more confident in 2025 numbers than I am in 2050, just because there's a lot more that can happen, a lot more I don't know about 30 years from now than I do from 5 years from now. But in general, you can expect them to be less than 10% off. Just looking at the MPOs finally here, this is the MPOs over time. We have on the left is the total population, so SNHPC is in red. All the MPOs are in blue, so that is the The urban MPO, or the MPOs are in color. The rurals are in not black and white. You can see that, we're growing a little bit and we're larger than all the others. And if we look on the right, this is indexed for population for 2020. Everybody's growing, and then we start to decline, all the RPCs, with the exception of Stratford County, Stratford Regional Planning Commission, which mirrors pretty closely Stratford County. Here's what that looks like at a regional level. On the left is the total population change. On the right is the the percentage population change. So by 2050, SNHPC could expect to see about another 33,000 people spread throughout the region. That's about 11.5% growth. Some RPCs are actually projected to lose population, like Southwest and North Country Council, but it's basically flat. It's next to nothing. And so everybody's growing, but everybody's slowing down is the main takeaway. I believe that's it. I'm going to stop sharing to see if there are any questions, but does anyone in the room have any questions?
Zach, were you doing all this work related to the housing, or is it just
So this is
routine-
kind of related to the housing, but also kind of not.
yeah, routine data, right?
Well, I mean, somehow I ended up on this subcommittee, and I don't remember exactly how I did. I don't know. I must have volunteered, but
Somebody volunteered.
somebody volunteered me. But this is the, and then yes, most of this work is part of both our general demographics work that we need for both our model and just our general planning, but also we'll go into the regional housing needs assessment when they're finalized.
It's a great overview.
Okay, doesn't look like there are any questions. So
Any other questions out there? All right.
Very talkative.
yeah. I don't think any of them are there. I think they all went.
I put them to sleep with the 10-year plan presentation.
That was the primer. I am not going to grab the controls because I know Tammy's on this. Tammy's up with the Rail Trail Passport overview.
Can you guys see my screen?
Yep, and hear you.
Perfect. I'm on a roll. All right, so my name is Tammy Zamoyski. I'm a regional planner here at the Planning Commission, and I'm going to give you a brief overview of the Rail Trail Passport. So the goal of the passport is to increase the awareness of the wonderful rail trail resources that are available in the greater Manchester region. This is what the passport looks like. It's available on our website. On the left here, you can see what it looks like on your mobile phone. We have a map of all of the existing and the planned rail trails in our region. And then each trail has its own individual page in the passport. So this one on the right has the logo for the Friends of the Goffstown Rail Trail. It tells you that it's 5.5 miles in length. The surface is hard packed gravel, so you know what to expect when you get there. We have a link to the website and then a little fast fact. So we've been doing a few different things for outreach. On the left here is the poster that we created to advertise the passport. So it says explore rail trails, win an e-bike. And we have this hanging up in a few local businesses off of the rail trail, like the Grind Rail Trail Cafe and Dairy. We've also been working with all of the region's rail trail organizations to help spread the word. We've been sharing it on social media. On the right here is a picture that someone shared using the hashtag Southern NH Trails. And we've also been getting the word out in our newsletters and our media blasts. So knowing that everybody loves prizes, Rail Trail e-bikes and Dairy has generously donated an e-bike as our grand prize. So anyone who logs a trip using the logging software between May and September 22nd will be entered to win a brand new e-bike. And they've actually given us an option between 4 different bikes. So the winner can choose between this mountain bike, a foldable bike, or one of 2 different cruiser options, depending on their preferences. So logging a trip is really easy. we have this link over here on the right that takes you to a little form. You just say what your name is, what trail you visited, what date you visited, and then it also has an option to add a photo. So you can see these photos on the left here that people have submitted. In the past, we had hard copies of the passport that we delivered to local businesses along the rail trail. And we gave everybody a stamp and some ink so that people participating in the program could come in and get their passport stamped. It was kind of hard to track participation that way, though, between staff turnover and just all of the struggles that small businesses are going through right now with the pandemic. We would call and say, hey, how many people have you had come in? And whoever answered the phone that day maybe, doesn't work there very often or just didn't have a good idea. So we decided to go all digital this year. So as of earlier this week, we've had a total of 35 entries. And in case you were wondering, the Dairy Rail Trail has been the most visited rail trail with 12 check-ins. So that's it for me. I told you it would be quick. If anybody has any questions, here's my contact information, or I think we have time now.
All right.
This is Dave Pierce. May I make a comment for Tammy?
Of course.
Yes, along the line of rail trail, our select board here in Goffstown will be voting on a revision of the rail trail ordinance for use of the trail here in Goffstown. That they've had 2 public hearings. So next Monday, they will be voting on the ordinance. The ordinance is simply replicating the RSA 265 definitions of class 1, class 2, class 3 e-bikes. The drive behind making sure that our town ordinance is in line with the state RSA is because there's a firm that wants to set up a retail of e-bikes here in Goffstown. And they wish to be located, their shop will be located right on the abutting the rail trail. So it's just like a car dealership. You go in to want to buy a car, you take it out on the public road for a test drive. This firm wants to be located right on next to the rail trail, so they can tell their customers, here's the e-bike you're considering to buy. Just go out front and take a test drive a half mile in either direction. And if when you come back, we'll talk about the buying of the e-bike. So that's what's happening regarding e-bikes here in Goffstown. And then there's a follow-on action that I'm involved with, and that's how do you advertise the definitions of class 1, class 2, which are allowable. How do you advertise that on all our signage that we have at trailheads? Oh, so that's the update from Goffstown.
That's exciting. Thank you for sharing.
All right. Any other people have any other questions? You can always get in touch with Tammy. Thanks, Tammy.
Yep.
All right, with that, I've got a brief presentation on more to do with bear with me a second. There we go. Okay. share it now. Right, but why isn't it? Oh, sorry. Okay, can everybody see the slide that says connecting rail trails?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thanks, Tammy. So this is a recent development. I think many of you will be aware that there are a series of rail trails, and most recently, the New Boston Rail Trail had some significant investment. This is a picture of the rail trail very near the northerly end, as close to the Goffstown rail trail as it comes, and it's a nice hard pack service. They've done a nice job of cutting back the trees without cutting back the trees too much, if you will. It's really beautiful, and I'll just encourage everybody to get out on all of these rail trails if you haven't. So many of you are probably familiar with the Piscataqua Trail, which is in Manchester, and this connects really the ballpark area across the Merrimack River through this area of town in the West End, right to the Goffstown Rail Trail. And this section's a little bit over 2 miles, I believe. Goffstown Rail Trail picks up there at the end of the Manchester Rail Trail, continues all the way to the village of Goffstown, kind of parallels Route 114, crosses it twice. And then ultimately you get to just west of the village area of Goffstown is the New Boston Rail Trail. All these maps came from TrailLink, which if you've never been on is a great source of information of rail trails across the country and amenities and other things that are in close proximity to them. And then I just have this zoom in to kind of highlight on both ends of the New Boston Rail Trail, it doesn't actually get you to the village of Goffstown. It's a little bit over a mile away, and the village of New Boston. I'm not exactly sure how far that's away, but it looks to be, again, a little bit under or around a mile. So Dave Pierce, who just spoke, came to us recently and just was curious about, with all this mileage, cumulatively about 13.6 miles, there's a gap, an on-road gap in Goffstown, just about to the New Boston line, the New Boston town line. And it's a gap a little bit over a mile, almost 2 miles actually. And it's perfectly bicyclable, but there's some challenges with speeds and crossing 114 itself, which I'm going to get into in a second. Here's kind of the whole breakdown. It's the section here that's in yellow, the top of the map. It's really all on road. There's some parking along the street on 114 here, so you really would have to take the shared lanes, which were marked when they redid the section of 114 a couple of years ago. And then there's a nice wide 9-foot shoulder that takes you all the way to an alternative here route to get there at Parker Road and Riverside Drive, or you can continue down. I believe that's the Parker Road. Anyway, you cut it. When Tammy and I were down there with a group last week, here's a picture of us. Speeds are very high, definitely 50 miles an hour or more. It's posted for 50 miles an hour. The shoulders are plenty wide, but they're not marked as bike lanes. And we really want to look at a better way to get from between the two rail trails. And DOT, which attended this meeting, was very open to considering, and they had their own ideas. They were actually had no problem with the Department of Public Works in Goffstown stenciling bicycles in the shoulders as soon as they want to. But it still gives you some issues. There's still issues again with the crossing and the speeds if you are going to share the lane, and just the speeds in general if you're adjacent to traffic. So we discussed all these topics here, the width of the shoulders and actually marking them, the idea of doing shared lane markings, some route options to take people away from the shared lane areas if riders aren't comfortable with taking the lane. And then overall, just what can be done about speed. Those of you who aren't familiar with shared lane markings, these are generally what they look like. This one's has a little bit of additional paint, the little dashes to the left and right of the shared lane marking. But essentially it says it's okay, expect bicycles in this area, and bicycles should be in this position if you're comfortable. It's generally applied in places under 35 miles an hour. And then this is the actual Route 114 cross section, not far from where we took a look at it crossing. There are at least 9-foot shoulders. It's probably a 12-foot lane, two 12-foot lanes, and the double yellow line's about a foot. So there's quite a bit of pavement here. Upwards of over 40 total feet. And Dave also asked us about in DOT about, okay, well, we're at the crossing, it'd be nice if the speeds were lower. The context here is all the same throughout the route. And the idea was simply to move, as you can see, these 3 signs that are closer to the village and move them out closer to where the crossing would be, basically just step the speeds down earlier when you're coming west to east, and boost the speeds later when you're going east to west, and ideally down from 50 and 40 to something around 35 at the crossing, which would be right here, Parker Road. And to change speeds, let me just cover this first. So the next steps here, Goffstown Department of Public Works are going to stencil shared lane markings and bike lanes in places where that's appropriate. The 2 towns are going to seek planning assistance through the commission here to develop medium and long-term alternatives for the roadway context. Again, that is in order to change speeds. The thinking is there's going to need to be some contextual changes to the roadway. Again, it's the same context today. So where the signs are, the speed limit signs are today, and where they would be moved is generally the same context. So that's kind of where it needs to be looked at a little bit more closely. And then ultimately, in the medium and long term, what can be done physically out there or with the road design to slow speeds, make a formal crossing at Parker Road. And I didn't include it here, but also what about doing a multi-purpose path or some sort of a separated bike facility or multi-purpose facility that would be adjacent and in the existing right-of-way. So that would need to be looked at more closely. So what does a 2-way shared use path look like? Well, within the existing pavement, again, there's a possibility to borrow or reallocate some of that pavement for a facility that might look like this. This is generally what you do when speeds, again, are greater than 35. If they were to maintain the speeds at that higher range, maybe reduce them to 40, simply reallocate some of that pavement, put a physical solid barrier between a 10 to 12 foot wide shared use path, have a smaller roadway shoulder than the 9 foot that's out there today on both sides, and perhaps even narrow the lanes themselves down from 12 to say 11 feet. So you could get a foot or 2 here, 3 or 4 feet here, and actually build a nice separated facility like this. Another alternative would be to do a full buffered multi-use shared path. And this would again need to look at the total available width in the right of way. Still would probably need to narrow the roadway and the shoulders, but provide a nice green buffer, at least 10 feet ideally. I think 5 feet's the minimum for an unbarriered buffer, and then also to have a nice wide 10 to 12 foot shared use path back from the pavement. Still, again, ideally would reduce speeds on the main road, but they could be over 35 miles an hour. And then the crossing treatments. This one's more of in an existing slower urban context. I would say, I think it says here somewhere lower than 30 miles an hour. It's more of a rural type of crossing with a refuge area here in the middle with these 2 green islands. But the shape of this passageway through the shared use path, it necks down, it tends to slow vehicles down as they approach it. This diagonal configuration forces the people crossing to be looking at the people driving through, so it gives a little bit of more eye contact, and that helps with making it safer. This one, that next one actually has a raised, the end of the shared use path is raised slightly, so it ramps up a little bit. with some advanced notice, the little pyramids there, the triangles. This has not been done on 114, but they have developed these hawk signals, which actually, when they're depressed, send up a red signal and ultimately require people driving through to stop. This is would be a place where perhaps there's not as much frequent crossing, but it's a pretty dangerous location. And there's precedent for it already on 114 between the village and Pinardville, Manchester on 114. So that's a potential treatment that could be done at the crossing as well. This is the existing crossing, one of them of the Goffstown rail trail and 114 using the hawk signal. So that's really what I have for you. Again, next steps, Dave's going to be working with New Boston Rail Trail Organization, and Goffstown and New Boston are going to be putting forward some sort of proposal and request to their commission members to work with us ultimately to look at some medium and longer term treatments for the rail trails to connect them. Any questions?
Carl?
Yeah.
I got a question. Most of the section we're talking about there is outside of Goffstown's compact.
That's right. We were
So-
meeting right at the compact.
Right, at you basically at the line.
Yeah.
Who's then responsible for maintaining that?
So this came up, and Tammy, correct me if I'm wrong here. DPW said that they would be willing to move to essentially, potentially do the maintenance for it, not necessarily move the compact line.
But just, do a little, just
Yep.
carry the plow another.
He already turns around, is what he said, at Parker
Parker Station.
Station Road. And so not that big of a deal. I'm sorry, the DOT would be, of course, very interested in moving the line for all purposes. That was kind of laughed about, joked about, somewhat seriously, but that's kind of all part of the next steps as far as what is the longer term solution here to making improvements for the rail trail and connecting the two. And they don't know. This needs to be explored. Any other questions? Here at 10:44. Everybody awake out there? Every camera's off.
Still here, just listening.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's great.
Just listening here too, Carl. Good job.
I think we're at the end of our agenda.
Fast, you don't have to do that.
Anybody else come in late that I should note? All right. Is there any other new business or any comments that anybody would like to make related to other business? All right, well then I would, I don't even know if we need to formally.
Oh, sorry. I was trying to get my.
Oh yeah, that's no
thing
problem.
unmuted. Hey, just good morning. So just wanted to remind everyone the Clean Diesel program is still open. The first round of applications is due September 9th, and there's if there's funding remaining after we score round 1, there will be a round 2, which will be due November 1st. If you have any questions about this program, if you're looking to replace a diesel unit or upgrade one or do some other diesel emission reduction activities, please feel free to contact me. I can be reached at richard.a.desillo@des.nh.gov. If you kind of just Google search New Hampshire Clean Diesel, you'll come up to our webpage. It'll have all the information, including my contact information. And I'm happy to help anybody who's looking to submit a project. That's all. Thanks.
Hey, great. Thanks, Ricky. Anybody else have any announcements or things they'd like to discuss at this time? All right. Well, seeing none, I just have one announcement myself for us here. Just wanted to make sure that everybody was aware that we are seeking nominations for the Clausen Award and the Tethers Award. The Clausen, again, is for a volunteer planner or volunteer period. And the Tethers Award is for a professional planner or someone within our world deserves acknowledgement. And I think those are due 26th of this month. Yeah, 26th of September.
August.
Excuse me. August. And if you have any questions about that, just to notify myself, Nate, or anybody here at the commission, and we can help you with that. I believe the materials are on our website. All right, well, thank you. I think we don't need a movement to adjourn. No.
The discussion amongst the
Discussion.
members present is now over.
Discussion amongst members present is now over. Thank you, everyone. Have a good weekend.